Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a massive cinematic journey through the 2 million-year sweep of ancient India. Now look, history is often taught as just this dry, boring list of disconnected dates and dead kings. But that's absolutely not what we're doing today. We're going to look at ancient India as a continuous, brilliant engine of human progress. From the raw, gritty survival of our earliest ancestors all the way to the dawn of a spectacular golden age, we'll see exactly how ideas, trade, and culture just built upon each other to create one of the world's greatest civilizations. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll track the journey from the Stone Age, right through the Harappan and Vedic eras, dive deep into some major spiritual rebellions, and follow the massive rise of the Mauryan and Gupta empires. All right, let's jump right into Section 1. Foundations, the Stone Age, going from survival to settlement. Think about it. Before there were any cities, roads, or empires, there were just humans, ice, and forests. For over 2.6 million years during the Paleolithic era, our nomadic ancestors were really just trying to survive out there, mastering fire and creating basic stone tools. Then, as the Ice Age finally ends around 10,000 years ago, we enter the Mesolithic. The climate warms up, people invent smaller, sharper micro-tools for hunting, and crucially, they start domesticating dogs. Because, hey, even ancient humans needed a best friend, right? But the actual revolution happens in the Neolithic era. Humans discover agriculture. They start growing wheat and barley and build actual settled villages, like that incredible site of Mehrgarh in present-day Balochistan, which dates all the way back to 7000 BCE. That specific shift, from wandering to farming, literally changed the world forever. Moving on to Section 2, the Harappan civilization, the first urban marvels. So, that revolutionary shift to farming eventually paved the way for a sudden, just spectacular explosion of the subcontinent's first great urban centers around 2600 BCE. I mean, imagine planning a perfect grid city without any modern technology. They had streets laid out cutting at exact 90-degree angles, and while other civilizations at the time were just using sun-dried mud, the Harappans were building uniform houses with incredibly strong baked bricks. Almost every single house had a private bath connected to this highly advanced covered drainage system. Plus, they were absolute maritime masters, using a barge system to trade luxury goods like lapis lazuli all the way to Mesopotamia. And honestly, the craziest part? Archaeologists haven't found any major weapons or evidence of a rigid ruling class. It really appears to have been this highly egalitarian, trade-focused society centuries ahead of its time, communicating with a script that we still, to this day, haven't been able to decipher. But of course, this brings us to one of history's absolute greatest mysteries. How does a civilization this advanced, this perfectly organized, just disappear? Because around 1900 BCE, these massive, bustling cities began to slowly empty out. Now, history is rarely black and white, and the Harappan decline is super heavily debated. It's like a giant puzzle. On one hand, you've got the Aryan migration theory. This points to the 1400 BCE bogus coin inscriptions in Turkey that actually mention Vedic gods, plus vast linguistic similarities across Indo-European languages, and the sudden introduction of horses and chariots. But on the other hand, we have incredibly compelling climate and internal evolution evidence. We know geological shifts caused major rivers like the Saraswati to just dry up, totally ruining their agriculture. Plus, modern DNA research on thousands of samples shows a 99% shared ancestry among Indians today, with absolutely no sudden genetic breaks. So that heavily suggests a slow internal rural migration, rather than some violent overnight foreign invasion. Which brings us to Section 3, the Vedic era to the Mahajanapadas, transitioning from nomads to kingdoms. As those great urban centers faded, the center of civilization shifted eastward, right toward the fertile Ganges plains, and society was fundamentally restructured from the ground up. What's really fascinating here is the stark contrast. The early Vedic society was nomadic, totally cattle-focused, and remarkably egalitarian. The kings, or Rajans, weren't absolute dictators at all. They actually answered to tribal assemblies called the Sabha and Samiti. And get this, women actively participated in them. But as time passed into the later Vedic era, people settled down to farm. Land became super valuable. With the discovery of iron, agriculture absolutely boomed, and society grew intensely complex. Suddenly, power centralized into hereditary kingships, and we start to see the emergence of a very rigid, birth-based Varna, or caste system. And because of that widespread use of iron and the massive agricultural surplus, we get a huge political boom. by the 6th century BCE, the landscape was completely dominated by exactly 16 powerful fortified states. These were known as the Mahajanapadas. Places like Magadha, Kosala, and Vatsa became these massive hubs of trade, equipped with standing armies and incredibly complex administrations.
All right, moving into section 4, Jainism and Buddhism, the spiritual rebellions.
Naturally, with the immense power of those Mahajanapadas came that rigid caste system we talked about and profound pushback against it. Two of the most influential philosophical movements in human history emerged right here, Jainism and Buddhism. Let's look at Jainism first. Central to Jain thought is Anekanta Vada, which is the doctrine of multiple realities. Think of that famous story of the blind men touching an elephant. One feels the leg and says, it's a pillar. Another touches the ear and says, no, it's a fan. Well, they're both right from their own perspective, but neither possesses the whole truth. It is just a brilliant philosophy of deep intellectual tolerance. Both Lord Mahavira and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, fundamentally rejected that rigid caste system and the super expensive animal sacrifices of the time. The Buddha introduced the Four Noble Truths, diagnosing the actual root of human suffering as desire, and he prescribed the Eightfold Path, which is this beautifully balanced middle way of living. Meanwhile, Jainism demanded strict adherence to 5 vows, with absolute ahimsa or nonviolence at its very core. The big takeaway here? They shifted the entire focus of religion away from trying to appease external gods through rituals and completely toward personal, internal moral discipline and liberation. Of course, as these philosophies spread like wildfire across borders, they naturally adapted and divided. For example, a terrible famine caused the Jain community to split. The Digambaras moved south, maintaining extreme asceticism and practicing sky-clad nakedness, while the Svetambaras stayed up north, wearing white clothes and preserving the scriptures. Similarly, Buddhism evolved. You had the Hinayana sect, focusing strictly on individual effort, and the Mahayana sect, which really emphasized bodhisattvas, these enlightened beings who actually delay their own salvation out of deep compassion just to help others. At age 80 in Kushinagar, the Buddha's very final words to his followers were Appa Dipo Bhava, be your own light. It's a stunning reminder of the self-reliance at the absolute heart of these spiritual rebellions before we dive back into the era of kings and empires. Section 5. The Mauryan Empire, from chaos to empire. Now, while all those spiritual revolutions were happening in the minds of the people, a massive political revolution was happening right on the ground. The fierce competition among those 16 Mahajanapadas culminated in the rise of the subcontinent's very first massive pan-Indian empire. And the timeline here is breathtakingly fast. In 322 BCE, a young, ambitious warrior named Chandragupta Maurya, guided by the brilliant scholar Chanakya, overthrew the corrupt Nanda dynasty. He built a vast empire, literally defeating Alexander the Great's general Seleucus Nicator. His son, Bindusara, then took over in 298 BCE and relentlessly pushed the borders deep into the south, interacting with the vibrant early Sangam chiefdoms of the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas. And then, in 273 BCE, Bindusara's son, Ashoka, takes the throne. In Emperor Ashoka's micronarrative is absolutely crucial. It's one of history's greatest transformations. He started out as a ruthless conqueror, but in 261 BCE, he fought the Kalinga War. It was a literal bloodbath. Over 100,000 people died. Seeing those rivers of blood, Ashoka was struck with overwhelming remorse. In a transformation that is pretty much unparalleled in history, the most powerful man in the world put down his sword, fully embraced Buddhism, and spent the rest of his life as a global ambassador of peace. He carved messages of tolerance, his Dhamma, into rock pillars across the entire continent, fundamentally changing the course of world history. Finally, Section 6. Post-Mauryan and early Guptas, the era of integration. So after Ashoka's death, the massive Mauryan Empire slowly fractured. But you might be wondering, did this cause a dark age? No way. As the Mauryan borders weakened, foreign groups moved in. The Indo-Greeks brought stunning, high-quality gold coins. The Shakas settled in the west and completely integrated into the local culture. Their king, Rudradhaman, even rebuilt major Indian infrastructure. The Kushans, under King Kanishka, took control of the highly lucrative Silk Road. See, these invaders didn't destroy civilization, they blended right in. They brought massive wealth pouring in from Rome and China. And while their cultural blending literally birthed the breathtaking Gandhara art style in the north, the Deep South saw a massive boom in maritime trade and brilliant Sangam literature. All of this immense cross-cultural wealth, global trade, and philosophical blending set the perfect, rich stage for a new power. In 240 CE, Srigupta founds a new dynasty. By 280 CE, Ghatotkacha asserts independence. And in 319 CE, Chandragupta I makes a highly strategic political marriage to the Likshavi princess Kumara Devi. With the wealth of the Silk Road and centuries of profound cultural evolution backing them up, the early Gupta rulers officially launched what the world remembers as India's Golden Age. Which brings us to the end of this explainer, and I want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder. Did the true Golden Age of history really come from the tip of a single conqueror's sword? Or did it emerge from the continuous, resilient blending of diverse ideas, global trade, and profound philosophies over millions of years? History is just so much more than who won a battle. It's about how humanity continuously builds its engine of progress. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.